Hello, this is a proof of concept video and demonstration for what it means when we click allow when receiving a permissions prompt through Power Apps. So essentially we are granting the app permissions to run actions as us under the services that we're allowing, which seems pretty normal, right? I mean, we're pretty used to it at this point, but I just wanted to demonstrate what this actually means, because we essentially could be giving someone control over our accounts for the next 30 days. And I just really want to hammer home that we should always be thinking about where these apps come from and what, if we trust them, really. Because with Excel, with Microsoft Word, you know, they have embedded macros, but there are also endpoint detections and Windows Defender and Mark of the Wild and all these security features that have been built over the years. Whereas with Power Apps, there's really none of that as far as I can tell. So just wanted to demonstrate what this means. And so from the context of a malicious user, what can they do? So here we have an IT intern. I have other browser sessions open as an executive assistant, as a CEO, which the executive assistant may have a relationship with the CEO, like a trust relationship. So the CEO is more likely to click on a link from the executive assistant rather than the IT intern. So we'll see how that plays out, as well as an IT developer. So just as an example. And what happens when we open this app is that it executes a workflow that runs in an infinite loop. And within the loop, it pauses every 10 seconds or so, and it reads data from a SharePoint list. And so for the next 30 days, this will read, let me clean up the list here. This will read commands out of this SharePoint list here and allow the IT intern to interact with the SharePoint list and thus interact with those running workflows. And to show what this actually looks like, just imagine we have the IT intern who maybe sent an email to the executive assistant, and let me just check the rules are not here, that, hey, I created this productivity app, let me know what you think. So the executive assistant opens it, and it's a productivity app, so it has, you know, permissions. So we click allow, and it's a blank screen. So that's all that needs to happen. At this point, in this list now, we have a new row, and this is our sessions list. We have a loop infinitely running for the next 30 days until it times out, running as the executive assistant. And we can now, through this page, interact as the IT intern and execute commands as this executive assistant. So we'll say, okay, I'm going to run a command through the user's connector, and I'm going to kind of wave my hands around the specifics here because I do have details listed in some of my other videos. So I won't go too into depth, but essentially here we're going to create a mail rule. And as we just saw, as the executive assistant here, we do not have any mail rules. So I'm going to save this, and in about 10 seconds or so, this should execute, and we should end up with a mail rule here in Outlook as the executive assistant. And so now at this point, there's a mail rule that says any incoming email that has a subject or body that contains this Outlook email message string will get automatically deleted, marked as read, and will stop processing rules. So what this looks like is now, as the IT intern, again, we're going to create and execute another command, and we're going to send an email to the CEO. And so the CEO will presumably trust this executive assistant, and we're going to send an email that says, do you think this productivity app would be useful to you? A link to the app. But importantly also, this right here is an, won't get too deep into HTML or anything, but we're just going to make essentially invisible text here called Outlook email message that should match the mail rule. And we'll see why that's important later. So when we save this, this should get executed, and then the CEO here should receive an email from the executive assistant, even though we are triggering all of this as the IT intern without the executive assistant knowing. And we just received an email and it says, do you think this productivity app would be useful to you? So we click on it as the CEO because it came from the executive assistant, someone we trust, and we see the permissions prompt and we click allow. Oh, it's blank. Well, at this point, we can close it and we can reply and say, it's blank. Is it broken? When we reply, this invisible text is on the reply. And because of that text, our mail rule as the executive assistant routes that reply directly to trash. And so the executive assistant never sees it, and it kind of buys this malicious user a little bit of time. And because at this point, the executive assistant and the CEO will have to maybe contact each other out of band or just remember it randomly later. They may go on with their day and completely forget about it. So there's a lot of risk with this from the malicious user perspective, but also it is just quite interesting. So if we now see in our sessions table, we have another session as the CEO. And so when we call our app, we can execute commands as the IT intern. We can execute commands as the CEO. So we'll say like collect SharePoint and OneDrive URLs. That's one built-in command that is a little bit more complex, but we'll see the result there. We'll also say specific connector. We're going to execute a command to the SharePoint and OneDrive connector. And here we're going to just read all of the files in their OneDrive. So this collect SharePoint and OneDrive URLs is returned, and this is the output. So it's a little bit small, but it does have like the CEO's OneDrive here. It also has a team that the CEO has access to that the regular IT intern does not have access to. And we can issue commands through this portal here and basically get all the data there or write to it as well. And what we're doing here is we're issuing a command to get the files in the CEO's OneDrive. So this is the response. It's a little bit difficult to read. Maybe I'll pull it over here, format it. But we see there's a document called topsecret.docx, and it's in the CEO personal OneDrive site. And that is right here as the CEO called top secret. And what we can also do is we can also issue commands as well. So we also have write permissions to his OneDrive as well, or her OneDrive. So if we do post, we can say this, the file content goes here, and this is just a text file, but you know, it could be anything. If the CEO syncs their desktop or OneDrive to their desktop, we could put malicious link files. Maybe they click on it for remote code execution. We could do maybe stomp some of their Excel files with a malicious macro, or do other things to just escalate further. But essentially, the interesting thing here is that now this is completed. And if I go to the CEO and I refresh, there's a new file there as of a few seconds ago that we forced as the IT intern to the CEO, to the CEO's OneDrive without ever directly interacting with the CEO. We never phished them directly as the intern. We phished first the executive assistant, who then we forced to phish the CEO. So this can get pretty interesting sometimes. And what we'll also do is, let's just say that we also phished the developer. And I just wanted to showcase this as well, just because currently, whoops, residue from a previous test, I think. So once this is executed, we also have access as the IT developer. And if we also collect, I'm going to do two things. I'm going to collect the emails or the OneDrive and SharePoint sites from them. And then I'm also going to get all their Teams chats. So this is just to show, and it might take a second, so that the response from this CEO command that we did earlier, the collect SharePoint and OneDrive sites from the CEO, the results here are different than the results from the developer because they're executing under different contexts. Here we have the developer OneDrive, doesn't have any more SharePoint sites. And if we refresh, we also have this Teams chats. So these are all private Teams chats. And this is interesting because it may have things like passwords, where there was a chat here where the global admin sent the developer, hey, the service principal was sent in an email, which we have access to because we've also hooked this developer's email. And the password is this. So presumably we may have credentials there. Maybe in another chat, the CEO said something interesting to this developer, but we can dump Teams chats. And I want to dig into this for a second because technically I am using a directory traversal issue that should be patched at some point. But the reason I want to call this out is because at some point it might be possible. And the reason it might be possible at some point, even when this is patched, is because about 2 years ago is when I first noticed the HTTP connection, HTTP action for SharePoint in Flow. And this gives us really a lot of control in Flow that we did not have before, because it allows us to create arbitrary API requests. And essentially, over the years, they've also added Outlook. They've also added, what is this, the users connector. And if we just search for HTTP, I think they also have like groups, send an HTTP request for groups and some others, I think Azure AD as well. But essentially there's not one for Teams. I just wanted to showcase it here because eventually, if they do add it, this will be possible to get private chats, even if the default Teams does not have an ability to get chats. So at least private one-on-one chats. So this is a general overview of what could happen if a malicious user does create these apps. I think it's important because as more companies adopt the technology and grant E3s or E5s to a large majority of their user base or their employee base, these can really come from anyone and anywhere, right? These developer tools are very powerful. So we should always try to make sure we trust where they come from and potentially get them reviewed at some point. The APIs for admins is a little rough. You can, I believe, pull the definitions for each workflow, but I don't know of any standard tool that really scans for these types of things. So just something to think about when you open these apps. Other details can be found in the description of this video, or you'll probably find links wherever you saw this to my other videos that kind of describe some of these more technically.